there's the things like that. Being European and male, being from any race, gender, what have you, that shouldn't take away from the achievement. That shouldn't take away from reading and understanding what people wrote and thought about the time. And he's right to point this out, that there's this kind of illiberal thing going on now. Alrighty, I got something interesting to talk about related to things going on at the university, and as I've said many times, university is where we tend to train the next generation of scientists, so I'm going to talk about something going on which caught my attention, and I think connects nicely with the last video on the Scholars Under Fire report. Anyway, but first, of course, a reminder for you all, I honestly hope you come over to Locals, because Locals is the best place on the internet, and join SciWorthy and Locals and become a supporter of SciWorthy. That's as low as $3 a month to become a supporter. You can become a member for free, but if you want to post or comment on anything anybody else posts, you've got to be a supporter. And you also get access to things like SciWorthy Conversations, which I do with Gina, who's the editor of SciWorthy over there, just for SciWorthy supporters. So yeah, if you come on over there and become a supporter, you get access to all that. You get to connect with me and others who are there, who are either scientists or we are science enthusiasts and about doing good science. Anyway, that's it for now, so I hope you come over to SciWorthy.locals.com. On to the story of the day that I have in mind for you all. So, some of you probably saw this via Twitter today, as I did, certainly. Bari Weiss published this letter on her Substack, and Bari Weiss is a good follow for things going on, just in general. But this caught my attention, because as I have often said, and I said at the beginning here, the university is where we train the next generation of scientists, so how we are training them is incredibly important, not just in social sciences or in social fields of history, philosophy, literature, and the rest, but also even in STEM fields, and how we were training them matters. So today, this caught my attention. Peter Bogosian may be a familiar name to some of you if you followed the grievance affair, or the grievance studies affair as it's been called, and we'll get into that in a second, because Peter actually details it here. But today, as you read, Bari Weiss published this for him out in public so people could see it, but he resigned from his position at Portland State University with a very scathing letter to them, which I think is... I'm sad that he's leaving, because we honestly need more professors like Dr. Bogosian. But it is what it is, and I cannot honestly blame him for leaving, given some of the illiberal tendencies of the universities of late. Having experienced some of this myself. Let's see. So my university sacrificed ideas for ideology. So today I quit. The more I spoke out against the illiberalism that swallowed Portland State University, the more retaliation I faced. So note from Bari up here. Peter Bogosian has taught philosophy at Portland State University for the past decade. In the letter below, sent this morning to the university's provost, he explains why he is resigning. So we're going to read through some of this letter, and then I'm going to add some of my commentary on top, which, as you're going to see, I'm thrilled with Peter myself, and I think I wish that he didn't have to make this choice, to be honest. Dear Provost Susan Jeffords, I am writing to you today to resign as Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Portland State University. Over the last decade, it has been my privilege to teach at the university. My specialties are critical thinking, ethics, and the Socratic method, and I teach classes like science and pseudoscience and the philosophy of education. But in addition to exploring classic philosophers and traditional texts, I've invited a wide range of guest lecturers to address my classes, from flat earthers to Christian apologists to global climate skeptics to Occupy Wall Street advocates. I'm proud of my work. Peter, if you end up seeing this, I'm proud of it too, because there is a need for more of that. And I fully say this, particularly I appreciate the global climate skeptics thing, because I actually do, as longtime followers of this channel know, I am a climate scientist for a living myself. And so I do end up chatting with climate skeptics, sometimes via Locals and sometimes via other platforms. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with chatting with them about it, talking about the science, talking about what they think and all this kind of stuff, and understanding what they think and how they think and all that. I'm okay with that, and I'm okay with all the rest of this here. Peter and I wouldn't necessarily agree on much, because I think he's a fair bit more liberal than I am. I'm a bit more conservative. We probably wouldn't agree on a whole lot of stuff, but you know what? I applaud you immensely for going to the degree that you did to make sure you could have different opposing views and get in there and do actual critical thinking, not the critical theory kind of critical thinking, but critical thinking in here with your students. So bravo, I appreciate that straight out of the gate. I invited those speakers not because I agreed with their worldviews, but primarily because I didn't. From those messy and difficult conversations, I've seen the best of what our students can achieve, questioning beliefs while respecting believers, staying even-tempered in challenging circumstances, and even changing their minds. I never believed, nor do I now, that the purpose of instruction was to lead my students to a particular conclusion. Rather, I sought to create the conditions for rigorous thought, to help them gain the tools to hunt and furrow for their own conclusions. This is why I became a teacher, and why I love teaching. But brick by brick, the university has made this kind of intellectual exploration impossible. It has transformed a bastion of free inquiry into a social justice factory whose only inputs were race, gender, and victimhood, and whose only outputs were grievance and division. Thank you. You said it extremely eloquently. I don't think it's necessarily true of all universities, though it has certainly gotten bad in some universities for sure. And there's other colleges which are not going for this, thank goodness. But as I've said it many times on this channel, I do very much believe that the purpose of a university, the purpose of a scientist, is the pursuit of the truth. And you cannot do it without having different perspectives, different worldviews, being able to challenge and poke and prod at every little damn thing. But if you can't because you're afraid of offending someone, terrific. But part of the thing with having, I mean that sarcastically, but part of the thing with needing to have these conversations in different worldviews, yes, you're going to rub some raw tendons there. You really are. But that's what you're supposed to do because you have to remember to learn to humanize people. Everybody's human. We have a lot of human beings here with very, very divergent worldviews, very different ways of thinking about things. But if it's about grievance and division and hating those people who are different from you, for whatever reason, because you're told history, you're told you're supposed to, or you're told with history, this, that, and the next thing, or some ridiculously poor scholarship, is making you think that, and there's some ridiculously poor scholarship, that doesn't help with humanizing people. That leads to more dehumanization. It's one of the reasons I have such a problem with DEI as it's currently done myself, is because it is so damn dehumanizing. Goodness, you think you think of each, most important thing is, whatever race, whatever gender, whatever this, whatever that. It is so freaking dehumanizing, and I absolutely despise it as it's currently going on. But despise the ideas, not the people. They're good people with good intentions. That's not the issue. But I agree right now that there is a lot of a tendency to push toward social justice rather than what a university is supposed to be, the bastion of free inquiry in pursuit of the truth. You cannot do that without different perspectives. So you can tell I'm going to agree a lot with Peter on this one in particular, and that's why I'm giving him kudos, because I think with some of the other topics we probably wouldn't agree on anything. But you know what? That's okay. I don't know Peter personally. I don't know all of his background and things. But I'm sure we'd agree on some things. I'm sure we'd very vehemently disagree on some things. And you know what? That's okay. Students at Portland State University are not being taught to think, rather they are being trained to mimic the moral certainty of ideologues. Faculty and administrators have abdicated the university's truth-seeking mission and instead drive intolerance of divergent beliefs and opinions. This has created a culture of offense where students are now afraid to speak openly and honestly. I noticed, I'll make a point here. I ran into this years ago, actually, because I wrote a blog piece years ago, highlighting the challenges of being conservative and a climate scientist at the time, and honestly not feeling like I could go poking and prodding into some of the odd things about climate science and some divergent thoughts and what have you. And, I have had it asked of me with respect to my own research, don't you think this will provide fodder for skeptics, for denialists, because of what I research? And my thought at the time was like, well, I'm thinking maybe it will, maybe it won't. And now I'm more like, why should I care? I'm poking and prodding to try and get at the truth. It's not my job to necessarily care about the narrative that somebody's going to try and use it with. I keep that in mind, and of course I'm going to push back on that if they're using it in a way that is using my research in a way that's unjustified by the research. But, you know, I after I wrote that piece, I did get some people writing back to me, and some of them who spoke to me in person and said, thank you for writing that, because I'm afraid too. I'm afraid to speak openly and honestly about these things. And that was, God, it was almost 6 years ago now when I wrote that. And that's the thing is, I totally get that. Really, honestly, I do. And it's really disturbing. I noticed signs of the illiberalism that has now fully swallowed the academy quite early during my time at Portland State. I witnessed students refusing to engage with different points of view. Questions from faculty at diversity trainings that challenged the approved narratives were instantly dismissed. Those who asked for evidence to justify new institutional policies were accused of microaggressions, and professors who were accused of bigotry for assigning canonical texts written by philosophers who happened to be European and male. Happened to have been European and male, I apologize. Yeah, that's a problem when you can't even read somebody just because they're European and male. Professor Krylov, actually, in the Peril of Politicizing Science, which I covered on this channel, also talked about that, that it's a bad idea with respect to science. Think about one of the things she noted in her letter, which I can link to that. I'll link to that video in the description of this video for you. But one of the things she talked about was the idea that when we're teaching physics now, we're talking about the 3 fundamental laws of physics. We're not attributing them to Isaac Newton, anymore, which, because he's a white man, when we teach them in school. And that's not right. I mean, it's still his achievement. Those 3 laws are still his achievement, and you shouldn't be robbing them from him just because you don't like the fact that he's a white man. That's not right to do. And a lot of this kind of inclusivity stuff is now, like, what is it? The Ecological Society of America wants to change the names of birds because of whatever origins might have been in racism or in bigotry. And I'm just like, that's a debate we might be able to have, but think about what you're doing in the stability of science. We depend upon a lot of our names, and you know what? Whether or not someone who discovered something had some ill beliefs that we don't like now or that we find important now, that doesn't take away from their achievement. Think of the thing with Marie Curie there. Marie Curie had an affair with another man shortly after her husband died. They didn't want her to come get the Nobel Prize, and she said, "No, I'm coming to get it because I'm getting it for my work, not for my personal beliefs or my personal affairs." There's the things like that. Being European and male, being from any race, gender, what have you, that shouldn't take away from the achievement. That shouldn't take away from reading and understanding what people wrote and thought about the time. And he's right to point this out, that there's this kind of illiberal thing going on now. At first, I didn't realize how systemic this was, and I believed I could question this new culture. So I began asking questions. What is the evidence that trigger warnings and safe spaces contribute to student learning? I would like to know the answer to that myself, to be honest. I'm still waiting for an answer on that. Why should racial consciousness be the lens through which we view our role as educators? Correct answer, it shouldn't, is my comment there, but I suspect Peter would agree on that, but I agree with his question. Let's put it that way at the very literal thing there. How do we decide that cultural appropriation is immoral? Unlike my colleagues, I asked these questions loud and in public. I decided to study the new values that were engulfing Portland State and so many other educational institutions. Values that sound wonderful, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, but might actually be just the opposite. The more I read the primary source material produced by critical theorists, not the ones who actually promote critical thinking like Peter does, but the crazy folks that, well, not the crazy folks, the theorists that, they're not theorists, because it's not a theory. If I'm thinking of the scientific definition of a theory, they're not theorists. The ideologues who problematize everything and say you have to have a critical consciousness. There we go. The more I suspect their conclusions reflected the postulates of an ideology, not insights based on evidence. I began networking with student groups who had similar concerns and brought in speakers to explore these subjects from a critical perspective. And it became increasingly clear to me that the incidents of illiberalism I had witnessed over the years were not just isolated events, but part of an institution-wide problem. The more I spoke out about these issues, the more retaliation I faced. Early in the 2016-2017 academic year, a former student complained about me, and the university initiated a Title IX investigation. Title IX investigations are part of a federal law designed to protect people from discrimination based on sex in education programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. My accuser, a white male, made a slew of baseless accusations against me, which university confidentiality rules unfortunately prohibit me from discussing further. What I can share is that the students of mine who were interviewed during the process told me that Title IX investigator asked them if they knew anything about me beating my wife and children. This horrifying accusation soon became a widespread rumor. In the video on Scholars Under Fire on that thing from Fire about the targeting incidences of cancel culture, this was something they talked about with respect to a lot of the cases that they studied for that report, in that there was lots of incidences like this where there were horrifying rumors spread that so-and-so does this, so-and-so does that. There was harassment, intimidation, goodness knows what. A lot of it happens with these kinds of things, or at least from what I've seen thus far, the ones that we know about. And so, I'm not necessarily surprised to hear this from Peter, but it's pretty horrifying. I mean, yeah, if you want to have a good look over there, I think I still have the tab up. Yeah, you can go back to the Scholars Under Fire report, because there's a lot of them here. I also covered another one with the vice president of the American Mathematical Society saying she didn't think diversity, equity, inclusion statements were a good idea at Berkeley and that they were going to be coercive. And she was subsequently harassed like crazy for it, and all sorts of rumors went flying there. So there is a lot of that, and unfortunately not just in the social sciences or in scholarly fields like history and philosophy. So there is a lot more of it there than we'd care to admit sometimes, I think. Though it's not everywhere. I will say that from my own personal experience, in my own institution where I'm at, I haven't had a lot of this forced down my throat just yet, although I'm somewhat isolated as I'm a research scientist and not a professor. So it's an interesting thing there, although I'm seeing more and more of it creep in certain ways. With Title IX investigations, there is no due process, so I didn't have the access to the particular accusations, the ability to confront my accuser, and I had no opportunity to defend myself. Frankly, that's wrong. You should have due process with any kind of investigation or accusation or anything like that. You really should, to be able to know, who's your accuser. I mean, put them in mutual space and have a mediator there so you can ask your accuser these kinds of questions. But you should be able to know who your accuser is, even if it's like someone behind an anonymous wall. You can hear it for themselves. But that's my thing. Finally, the results of the investigation were revealed in December 2017. Here are the last two sentences of the report. Quote, "Global Diversity and Inclusion finds there is insufficient evidence that Bogosian violated PSU's prohibited discrimination and harassment policy. GDI recommends Bogosian receive coaching." Not only was there no apology for the false accusations, but the investigator also told me in the future that I was not allowed to render my opinion about, quote, protected classes or teach in such a way that my opinion about protected classes could be known, a bizarre conclusion to absurd charges. Universities can enforce ideological conformity just through the threat of investigations. And there's a couple of different stories from different universities of these kinds of things happening where people have to spend inordinate amounts of money or hire lawyers or any number of different things. And the university has a bit more than the professor does to be able to do such things. And so, and I apologize if you hear me coughing or any other number of different things, still dealing with a cold. Anyway, it's, that's the very dangerous thing. You're enforcing ideological conformity. You don't get any divergent views. Suddenly you're not pursuing the truth, and it's all about the groupthink and not offending anybody. And that's incredibly concerning, particularly when I think of bodies like the American Geophysical Union, or the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, or the American Meteorological Society, or any number. The Ecological Society of America, I think, too, are going down this sort of path of ideological conformity. And these are professional scientific organizations. These aren't the universities themselves. So I think of it from that perspective. And that is utterly concerning that there's this kind of groupthink that's creeping into the STEM fields just as much as into philosophy and history and a lot of the rest here. I eventually became convinced that that corrupted bodies of scholarship were responsible for justifying radical departures from the traditional role of liberal arts schools and basic civility on campus. There was an urgent need to demonstrate that morally fashionable papers, no matter how absurd, could be published. I believed then that if I exposed the theoretical flaws of this body of literature, I could help the university community avoid building edifices on such shaky ground. So in 2017, I co-published an intentionally garbled, peer-reviewed paper that took aim at the new orthodoxy. It's titled The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. This example of pseudo-scholarship, which was published in Cogent Social Sciences, argued that penises were products of the human mind and responsible for climate change. I haven't read the paper, to be honest. I knew about it, but I hadn't read it. I figured it was a joke. Well, no, I didn't figure it was a joke. It's not in a journal where I would have ended up reading anyway. Immediately thereafter, I revealed the article as a hoax designed to shed light on the flaws of the peer review and academic publishing systems. And yes, I agree immensely with Peter on this, that there is incredible a level of problems with peer review and academic publishing, and particularly when there's so few people that work in a particular field, and you get increasingly specialized, it's hard to find peer review that is truly independent and rigorous. Shortly thereafter, swastikas in the bathroom with my name under them began appearing in two bathrooms near the philosophy department. They also occasionally showed up on my office door, in one instance accompanied by a bag of feces. That's just freaking disgusting. Our university remained silent. When it acted, it was against me, not the perpetrators. I continued to believe, perhaps naively, that if I exposed the flawed thinking on which Portland State's new values were based, I could shake the university from its madness. In 2018, I co-published a series of absurd or morally repugnant peer-reviewed articles in journals that focus on issues of race and gender. In one of them, we argued that there was an epidemic of dog rape at dog parks and proposed that we leash men the way we leash dogs. Our purpose was to show that certain kinds of scholarship are based not on finding truth, but on advancing social grievances. The worldview is not scientific, it is not rigorous. And in this, I agree with him also. I do think a lot of the grievance studies, things, particularly those like that were highlighted in cynical theories, or in the things that he's talked about here, and he's linked off to this, and I will of course share this so that you can go find it. But I agree that there's not rigorous work done in a lot of these things. It is incredibly poorly done. I have seen this, and I've reviewed on this channel where it's creeped into nature, of all places, and gotten really bad. And it's just like, I immediately pointed out the logical fallacy, back to the paper, and was like, there is a logical fallacy there. You're showing me a disparity, but not why the disparity exists. What? And you published this in Nature with that logical fallacy there? What? I did review that on this channel. You can go back and find it. There was the paper, An Actionable Anti-Racism Plan for the Geosciences, which geosciences is where my field falls in with climate science. Anyway, administrators and faculty were so angered by the papers that they published an anonymous piece in the student paper, and Portland State filed formal charges against me. Their accusation, research misconduct, based on the absurd premise that the journal editors who accepted our intentionally deranged articles were, quote, human subjects. I was found guilty of not receiving approval to experiment on human subjects. Talk about a stretch of frickin' logic. What? What? Oh, for crying, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That is such a length. You weren't even doing a formal research program with that. You were just pointing out how stupidly absurd some of these journals are and the things that they accept that they think are scholarship when they are not. Meanwhile, ideological intolerance, that would be actually a fun, I'm going to make a note of that. That would be fun to see somewhere. Hey, if somebody's watching this and is like, and you want to put it up for a debate somewhere, at a university level or what have you, I would watch it gladly. How would you define scholarship? How would you define scholarship as being rigorous? That would be a great thing to see on a channel somewhere. I have not seen it yet, or I would actually love to see it debated in university space. You know what? Put one of these editors, put one of those peer-reviewed editors up there that had to receive one of these hoax papers. Let him define what he calls rigorous scholarship. Let somebody else like Peter Bogosian or Brett Weinstein or Heather Haying or any number of other folks put up what they think is peer review, is rigorous scholarship, and let them talk about what they think is rigorous scholarship. That would be great to see. That would be great to see. I doubt it'll happen, but that would be great to see. Let's see. Meanwhile, ideological intolerance continued to grow at Portland State. In March 2018, a tenured professor disrupted a public discussion I was holding with author Christina Hoff Sommers and evolutionary biologists Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying. In June 2018, someone triggered the fire alarm during my conversation with popular cultural critic Carl Benjamin. In Sargon of Akkad, actually, if you know him on YouTube. In 2018, an activist pulled out the speaker wires to interrupt a panel with former Google engineer James Damore. The university did nothing to stop or address the behavior. No one was punished or disciplined. That is actually if it happened, I would love to see Portland's response. In fairness to Portland State University, I would love to see Portland's response to the accusations there. But if it happened, that's absolutely intolerable. And Portland State ought to be ashamed of themselves for not allowing free inquiry to go on. That's the thing that bothers me. Why are you okay with students being weak and frail and not resilient, and not teaching them to be resilient in the face of ideas that they don't like? Not teaching them how to see people as humans, even though they have very different ideas from you. Why are you not teaching that as a university? Goodness. For me, the years that followed were marked by continued harassment. I'd find flyers around campus of me with a Pinocchio nose. I was spit on and threatened by passersby while walking to class. I was informed by students that my colleagues were telling them to avoid my class, and of course, I was subject to more investigation. I wish I could say that what I'm describing hasn't taken a personal toll, but it's taken the toll, exactly the toll it was intended to, an increasingly intolerable working life, and without the protection of tenure. This isn't about me. This is about the kind of institutions we want and the values we choose. Every idea that has advanced human freedom has always, and without fail, been initially condemned. As individuals, we often seem incapable of remembering this lesson, but that is exactly what our institutions are for, to remind us that the freedom to question is our fundamental right. Educational institutions should remind us that that right is also our duty. Portland State University has failed in fulfilling this duty. In doing so, it has failed not only its students, but the public that supports it. While I am grateful for the opportunity to have taught at Portland State over a decade, it has become clear to me that this institution is no place for people who intend to think freely and explore ideas. This is not the outcome I wanted, but I feel morally obligated to make this choice. For 10 years, I have taught my students the importance of living by your principles. One of mine is to defend our system of liberal education from those who would seek to destroy it. Who seek to destroy it, I should say. Who would I be if I didn't? Sincerely, Peter Bogosian. Okay. That last section I wanted to read altogether because he's describing a lot of the cancel culture harassment that happens. And as I mentioned here, one of the ones I talked about in the last video under the Scholars Under Fire report, which I've got on the screen now, was the sad case of Mike Adams at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, who couldn't take the intense amount of harassment that he got, and I think it was less than a week. Yeah, he was due to retire on August 1st of 2020, and with almost a week ahead of that, he was found in his home with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He committed suicide because he couldn't take the threats and harassment and all the intimidation he was receiving. And admittedly, whatever you thought of him, it wasn't right that he had to experience all that. And the same thing goes for Peter here. It's not right that he's had to experience that level of harassment and haranguing from students, and Portland State did nothing about it. That is the thing that is also very shocking in all of this, is that Portland State University did absolutely nothing. UNC Wilmington, to their credit, in Mike Adams' case, tried initially to protect his freedom of speech, and it was the second time when it got too intense for UNC Wilmington and they didn't feel like they could, or they weren't willing to even stand up and try and say, no, we're still keeping this professor, when they forced him into an early retirement, and then everything went downhill for him, unfortunately. it's not right that it should happen. It's that it should happen. You got to be pretty thick-skinned to deal with it now if you're going to be walking around and wanting to explore some really controversial ideas. Um, and it is the job of a university to remind us. It is the purpose of a university, in my view. I share this view with, oh God, I can't remember his name. I talked about his piece a while back in a video, on which is more important truth, which is that you can't have dueling teloses, at a university. You have to pick one, truth or social justice. You can't have both. And I do think the purpose of a university is in sync with the purpose of a scientist, is the pursuit of the truth. And the freedom to question is integral to that purpose. Freedom to question everything, to challenge, to poke, to prod, to peel back the surface and do really unique data analysis and answer some really interesting questions, pose some really interesting questions. Get creative in what question you pose. Remember, one of the principles of scientific inquiry is posing a significant, meaningful question to begin with. And so there is that, and if you cannot have the freedom to do that, if you cannot have the freedom to question, or you do not have the freedom to question, then it really just, it falls apart in terms of in terms of the pursuit of the truth and the pursuit of doing science, too. I agree, I think. And so that's been a lot of my concern for a very long time. So I know this is probably immensely hard, as Peter writes at the end here, to make the choice to have to leave after a 10-year career. I'm sure he did not want to do that. In fact, he writes that he did not want to do that. But he felt that he couldn't stay anymore because the university had forgotten its purpose. That Portland State University had forgotten its purpose. And, I mean, I wish it could have been some other different way for him too, that he could still stay there and do his work. I have no doubt that Peter will land on his feet and find something, though. I'm imagining the next little while here is going to be an interesting time for him to figure out where he goes from here. So my best I wish for you, Peter, and I say thank you for doing this, because this is a brilliantly written letter, and encompasses a lot of what I think in certain things. I don't think it's terrible everywhere yet. I am certainly concerned about a few different universities that are near and dear to my heart, like my alma mater and where I am now. And I am very concerned at large for what Peter points out in his letter, that there's such a push for ideological conformity that if it gets really entrenched in STEM and in sciences, I do worry about what's going to happen with respect to the future of science here, when we're not allowed to explore certain things, and a new kind of Lysenkoism, if you will, comes into the picture at that point. So yeah, I don't know where to go from here, but and I'm kind of reacting to this fresh on the fly and thinking of it. So I do got to say, I applaud you, Peter. And in undergrad, I would have loved to have a professor like you. To be honest, I really would have loved to have a professor like you, because I'm sure we would have had some great conversations. Probably wouldn't have agreed on everything, and you know what? I think that's totally fine. But I would have absolutely appreciated the opportunity to learn some philosophy from you and take a couple of your courses. And I hope someday, if universities remember their purpose, or get back to actually what their purpose is, that those of us who want that real purpose can gather there and start teaching students again, or start doing research in places that respect the freedom to question everything. And it is our fundamental right to do so, to question every dang little thing. So So that's it. All I got to say is thank you, Peter Bogosian, for writing this. This is a great letter. I hope it doesn't... I wish you all the best in whatever comes next, but... Thank you for writing this, and I will be curious to see. I'll be keeping an eye out for what Portland State has in response to this, particularly since this is pretty scathing, and it is pretty absolutely horrific that Portland State University, if true, did not do anything to defend you when they should have. But they let you be harassed and intimidated like this. But that's it. That's my thoughts on it, and... Again, I mean, like I said, a lot of some of the crazier things going on with critical theory have come out of academia and gotten into sciences and everywhere. So I think it's always great to point out when people who are part of the academy or leaving the academy or any number of different things are speaking against it. So thank you for that, Peter Bogosian. If you haven't checked out the Grievance Studies papers, I would check it out because they are linked from here with his YouTube channel. And amongst other things in here. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Peter, for what you wrote. And I sure as heck hope that illiberalism doesn't come too far into the sciences, but we'll have to see on that one. If you like this video, I hope you hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz. And of course, come on over to SciWorthy.locals.com and find me over there. If you become a supporter, you can chat with me and others who are fun old science enthusiasts. Until next time, I'm Adrian signing off. Stay curious, my friends.